How you doing?
Very good. I'm
gonna put my feet down so my socks aren't showing in the shot. You know, really bad day to wear a sock with a hole in it. I should have considered that. I said, you know what, there's no way he's gonna see my socks. I wore the nicest pants, a good shirt. Also very inconvenient time for the sorority living next door to throw a party last night, so I had to stay up and listen to Nicki Minaj for like 7 hours.
But you didn't go over to the sorority?
You know, when you're interviewing the founder of Tesla, you kind of get your priorities straight. Girls become a distraction, not a thrill.
Girls are never a distraction.
Before you founded Tesla, you founded Nuvo Media, which was, I mean, pretty successful for you. You sold it for, what, $180 million?
Yep, that worked out.
Yeah, and then after that, you founded what is now obviously the most valuable car company on the planet. Tell me about a time you failed.
Well, there was lots of small times that you know, we failed or I failed. Before I started any companies, I would get parachuted into these projects where the projects were completely, you know, off the rails.
Yeah.
And then my job was to fix it. Those didn't always work out. I had one where I actually fired the client. I mean, it's the only time I've ever walked off a job, basically. The guy who was running it said, well, I agree, you just don't have what it takes to ever start a project.
Ooh, boy, you proved him wrong.
No, I was thinking about that years later. I thought, you know, that guy was such an idiot.
Yeah. So does the chip on your shoulder help productivity, or do you think it's just a burden?
No, it does. I never considered a chip on my shoulder.
No.
It was like, I was so glad to get out of there. I just thought, you know, my life is too short to be dealing with this.
Good.
Yeah, so.
Tell me about your time in Berkeley. Let's go back to the beginning. What were you like?
It was super fun, and we're in the dorms, which was a big deal. We got super lucky because it was
Which dorm did you get?
Unit 2, maybe one of the dorms in Unit 2. I can't remember.
Trash. I'm sorry.
They were terrible at the time. They're nicer now. But at the time, it was like an incredible housing crisis. They had set up tents in the basements of some of the dorms for people who just could not find any housing anywhere.
Yeah, but to go to Berkeley, I'd sleep in a tent too.
Well, right, exactly. So people did. Like, it was not. It was a thing. One of the funny things, though, is I get to Berkeley, and I'm from Sacramento, where everything is flat. It's like tabletop flat.
Right.
So I get to Berkeley, and I'm on the fourth. I think I'm on the 4th floor of the dorm, and you know they have this rickety old elevator, so everyone's just walking up and down the stairs. And then, you know, my classes are all over the campus, and they're all up and down. And about day 3, I could hardly walk.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is so unfortunate. I get to start college, and I'm dying of some weird disease. Right? And then I realized, oh no, it's just that I'm having to go up and down hills for the first time in my life.
Yep. I constantly remember it. Like, why are the muscles in my ass hurting all the time?
Exactly.
Like, my roommate and I, on the first week of school, we were so exhausted from the heat. He was like, man, can we Uber home? And I was like, we live right there. He's like, please, dude, I'll pay.
Okay, that's sad.
No, it was sad.
Thankfully, Uber wasn't an option, you know, in the 80s.
Yeah. How did you pivot from that into being an entrepreneur? Was it an instantaneous switch, or did you start working first and then?
So I had always done random projects for people, so it seemed very natural. So my first job was, you know, some random project for a company in Sacramento when I was 16, and you know, at that time, if you knew something about computers, people would come up to you all the time. In fact, I got my first job by standing in line in a 7-Eleven. You know, and the guy I was talking to, the guy who ran the 7-Eleven, who was part of the computer, you know, club basically in Sacramento, and that's why I was at the 7-Eleven. I was talking to him, and the guy in line goes, like, you know, how do you know all this stuff about computers? And we started talking, and he's like, can you come work for us? And I'm like, I'm 15, dude, I can't. He says, when you turn 16, call me. So I did, and that was my first job. Anyway, but there was always these projects to do certain things, and I would get approached all the time to do things for people. Yeah. So I was very used to this idea of kind of piecing together a job. In fact, I never thought I would have a job. It just never occurred to me. I never thought that far in advance.
So you were so into the mindset of, oh, people want the skills that I have.
Exactly, and I can shop them around and do only the things I want to do.
That's really good.
Yeah.
Do you have difficulty sitting still? Are you one of those people that constantly needs to be working to avoid the feeling of stagnation?
I like to be doing stuff. You know, so I kind of stopped working, years and years ago, and then immediately became a local politician, within.
You did?
Oh yeah. I was.
I did not find that in my research.
It's a very small, tiny local politician. I was on the school board here in Woodside for 9 years, 2 terms, and then literally I went to my last school board meeting, then spoke at a startup conference like 2 weeks later, and the person on the panel next to me said, "Hey, what are you doing now?" I said, "Nothing." And she says, "Why don't you come hang out at our VC office for just come by." Anyway, I'm still there. That was 6 years ago or whatever.
Which VC is this?
Sparrow Ventures. We're a $125 million fund.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sparrow means hope in Latin, doesn't it?
Excellent.
I'm not going to act like I know that. I totally looked that up.
I was going to say you had
yeah,
to.
I did. So how is it being at Sparrow Ventures, and what kind of future do you want to build there?
The reason why I was so intrigued by it is they only invest in things that make the world better in some dimension. So we don't invest in advertising, we don't invest in guns, and there's a whole bunch of things we don't invest in. But otherwise, it's a generalist fund. So we look at robotics because we believe robotics makes the world better. Because it automates tasks that people don't want to do really. Right. Ultimately, I find being on the venture side of the table after having begged for money for so many years from various projects along my lifetime. I now understand why. I never understood actually really when we would pitch a VC fund, and we clearly had an awesome idea, and like why they wouldn't just say yes. Well, I now get it, because we see so many ideas, and it's not only do you have to have the best idea, or a good idea at least, but you also have to have one that's better than anything that you've seen recently or that you're likely to see in the near future. So, we say no. VCs say no almost always. Yeah. It's I don't know 1 in 100 or whatever they say yes to. And being on that side of the table has been super interesting that way. And I love seeing all these different companies, not being operating though, not being an operator, not being at the company. When you're part of a company, you make decisions all the time, and the decisions can give you feedback right away. Right. And that's just not the case with VCs. You do all this research, and then you say, okay, great, and you write a check, and 7 to 10 years later, you'll know whether that was a good idea or not. And that's like, the feedback loop is just terrible that way. Yeah. So
you've been on the other end of the table where you're the entrepreneur, and it seems like instantaneously you had pretty astronomical success.
Most startups fail. Yeah. So when a startup succeeds, a big part of that's just luck. It's just the timing and the people, and you like to think you create luck, which you do to some degree, but a lot of it is just you get kind of lucky. Right. But we got funding. Okay, great. What you don't see is to get funding for Nuvo Media, we approached dozens and dozens of firms that said no. I mean, it's just the way funding works, right? Yeah. And then you finally get, a lead, and you fill out the round, and you do all the stuff, and every round is like pulling teeth, and it's always this, thing, and there's all these disasters along the way. And then hopefully, the product comes out and people like it, which was the case, but in the end, you look back and the narrative is always, oh, and then we did this, and then we did that, and we did this marketing campaign that worked, and it was great. But that's like the successes of this field of disaster that goes on all around it.
Right. Do you see like a common denominator that every entrepreneur would fail if he lacked?
My co-founder, Martin Eberhard, between us, we make like a whole person. And I think that that's very useful. And we've seen that in other companies where the founding team is especially strong that way, just personality-wise. It's not necessarily the skill, and the skill sets are shifted, and really complementary. But so I think that's important. Not that we don't invest in solo founders all the time, but there is some data from the VC world that co-founded companies are slightly more successful, slightly more likely to exit well than single founders. And I think that's just why, because you get kind of the whole brain, assuming the founders don't kill each other, which is also, the flip side is that, there's a risk for that. We had seen lots of things that were super dysfunctional, that really didn't work. So when you look at that and you think, well, I can do better than that. We'll screw up in different ways, we'll become totally dysfunctional in these other ways, but we had at least some idea of a bunch of the disasters that we would come and help fix in these other companies. And I think that having some operational experience is useful that way. And that's one of the reasons why the VCs don't necessarily think that having a failed company is a disaster, because those people tend to have learned lots of lessons from that, more so than a success, because a success, everything kind of works out.
Yeah, I mean, especially if they're pursuing another company, it shows that they can get back up and continue again.
Yeah. And hopefully have learned a lot from the last disaster. Yeah. Hopefully the correct lessons. Sometimes they learn the wrong lessons. And they blame, lots of external things on their failure, which may be somewhat true, but a lot of times it's internal.
I like that you highlighted the contrast between you and Martin, because you guys had two successful, very successful companies. I mean, for you, they were a success. I know Nuvo didn't succeed after, but I mean, for you guys, you sold it for a sizable amount.
Sold it, and they, you know, when someone buys your house, they can paint it any color they want.
Yep,
right?
exactly.
So
You're free.
They killed it. Well, Rupert Murdoch took control of the company, and shortly after they acquired it, and then he famously said, "No one's ever going to read on screens."
What are the differences that make you and Martin such a compatible team?
He's technically extremely, extremely good, but there are things that he doesn't do very well. You know, time management perhaps is one of them, and there's a bunch of operational things that he's just, you know, that's not his thing, right? And those are things that I can do pretty well.
Yeah.
So that combination, and then I'm much more skeptical in a sense for a lot of his ideas, and therefore he has to really justify them. And sometimes, as he's justifying them, he's like, "Oh, yeah, right, not a good idea." So that helps. And then we're both relatively positive. We both kind of believe we can do stuff. That doesn't, and you know, you have to be a little bit delusional and optimistic to be an entrepreneur. So like we both have that, and that's kind of important.
Yeah.
You know?
I was gonna ask, when people are pushing back on your idea and saying that it's kind of far-fetched, but you see a vision that nobody else really seems to comprehend, how do you avoid giving into that feeling of delusion?
Well, so this is part of having a co-founder, I think, because there are days when you're sure that the skeptics are right and that this is the stupidest thing you've ever done. And ideally, at that same moment, the co-founder comes back from some meeting and said, you know, we're going to be bigger than Microsoft. You know, like it's, so, you know, ideally, you know, it's sort of manic depressive, you know, you don't synchronize, you know, you're a little bit out of phase and it keeps everything running. But there is, you know, when you have people who, you know, who are smart and have arguments against your vision, that's a time when you really have to sharpen the pencils and make sure your vision is right.
Yeah.
And we did that, you know, at the beginning, you know, with Tesla, we did that. We changed the way we were going to sell the cars really early on, I mean, before we raised money, because we got hit by people saying, you know, that's a bad idea, the way you were going to do it, you know, with these dealerships and stuff, that's not going to work. And the more we research that, we're like, oh, shoot, they're right.
Yeah.
They really know that market really well, and they're absolutely right. So those are examples where, you know, the people attacked the vision, but then it caused us to modify what we were going to do in a beneficial way.
Who are some of the first people in Tesla that said yes, and that like kind of reaffirmed your delusion?
Relatively quickly, we decided that it was possible to make the thing that makes the car go, the drivetrain, and that drivetrain would be the most efficient drivetrain ever. So the question was, how can you actually make the car? After a bunch of research, we figured out there are contract manufacturers that screw cars together. We then presented that to some people we knew couldn't invest for a variety of reasons. We told them, hey, we've got this idea, and we know that your fund can't invest in it. And it turns out that if you call up some, you know, kind of vague acquaintance and you say, hey, we have this crazy idea for an electric sports car. We want to pitch you. Can you give us feedback? The whole partnership will show up because they're so starved for seeing anything that's novel. It was great. And then we went out and pitched, after refining our pitch, to investors that we hoped would invest. And we got two early stage investors, SDL Ventures and Compass Technology Partners, to say yes. But they don't lead. So we have, you have to find a lead, right? So we had we had their money, we had, or would potentially have their money. We had some money from friends and family kind of thing, you know, angels, but we needed to find a lead. And we had heard through the grapevine that Elon was interested in electric cars. So we went down and pitched him. And he peppered us with questions over like a long weekend. We flew down again and met with him. And one of the great things about pitching Elon was that, you know, we went down to his rocket company, which at that time, you know, was only a year old. It had, you know, they were just building their first rocket motor. And, you know, to somebody building a rocket ship in a big garage, electric sports cars just don't sound that weird. Like there's just, you know, you're not going to be thrown out because, oh, that's a crazy idea. Like he's building a rocket ship, right? So, and he agreed to lead, and he was going to write a bigger check and could lead. then we were off to the races. Then once you had that, everyone came together. Now, we had seen lots of other firms that had said no in that interim, because almost always VCs say no.
Yeah. Did having Elon on board give you credibility that encouraged other investors to join?
He was not super well known at the time.
Right, but he still had the PayPal success and was
He had
building
the PayPal.
rockets.
Yeah, he was building rockets, which everyone thought he was
Crazy.
Completely crazy.
Yeah.
So it was not.
And people still think that today.
Yeah,
Not much has changed.
I think he's like demonstrably differently crazy now. But I don't think building rocket ships was a real improvement of his image, sort of in the bigger picture at the time. Now, it turns out it was, SpaceX is the most amazing company in the U.S., I think, but, that's a separate, that was a long, that was also an overnight success. That's like 15 years, or 20 years in the running. But it did help with a couple of investors that had invested with him before, that had invested in him before.
With Nuvo Media, you sold it, you got out, and then it failed. And with Tesla, you exited, and then it's now the most successful car company in the United States.
Great.
Which one hurts more? Seeing a company succeed without you or fail without you?
No, it's so. It's a really funny question. With the ebooks, our market timing was a little off. It was a little early for it. The technology was just barely possible, which is where we like to play. So that it fit it fit everything that we were looking for, and we got everything out of it that we wanted. And then, we sold it to a company that was at the time the largest publisher on the planet. So that was not a bad exit. And then all the investors were happy. Our employees, made a bunch of money. And then, a few months later, Rupert Murdoch took control of that company. He owned 48% of the company to begin with. He took control of it and killed the ebook projects. Those people then went on and worked for Amazon and Kindle years later. I mean, there was several years where no ebooks were around at all, like nobody thought anything of it. And then the technology kept improving, and the timing was more right. And the Nook came out from Barnes & Noble, and the Kindle came out, and that completely reinvigorated the industry. And then succeeding is great, because one of the goals of starting Tesla was to change the idea of an electric car. I mean, that from the very beginning, we said, startups fail a lot, but if we can get to the point where we can show off a really compelling electric car, super fast, it's going to be expensive, but it's going to be a sports car, it's going to be sexy, it's going to be beautiful. And if the image of an electric car goes from stupid golf cart no one's ever going to drive to, when I get rich, I'm going to buy one of those fast, beautiful electric cars. We felt that even if it always remained aspirational, that would be a complete win, because it would change people's perception. It would mean that the electric car market could exist. There could be other companies were going to do it if we didn't succeed. And then as Tesla succeeded, then it created, suddenly there was this existence proof that this was a good idea. And if you've never driven an electric car, maybe you don't understand it, but once you drive electric, almost nobody ever goes back. It's like 96% of electric car owners, when they sell their electric car, they buy another electric car. There's no maintenance on them, so there's zero maintenance interval. There's, every morning you wake up, you have a full tank. As long as you have someplace to park, you can charge, which, if you live in a house, all houses have electricity, so that's not a problem. So you wake up in the morning, you have a 300-mile range. Most people don't drive more than 300 miles in a day, right? So you wake up in the morning, you drive, you do everything you're going to do during the day, and then you just repeat. And the only thing you have to replace is tires and windshield wipers, and put windshield wiper fluid in the car. And you think of, internal combustion engine cars where you have to stop and get gas all the time, and you don't know where you're going to get gas, and it's always inconvenient because you run out of gas at the wrong time. You're racing to a meeting, and you're like, oh shit, I got to stop. All that's just gone. And so once it's gone, you never want to go back. It's better in all dimensions, and it's way cheaper, and it's environmentally much better.
The Tesla that we see today, do you think that that's maintained the same intention that you guys founded it with?
The Cybertruck is its own, weird beast, but this idea of making electric cars, ever more affordable while keeping the performance very high. is what we wanted to do. I mean, the next car was a sedan. The sports car market is great, but it's relatively small. So I mean, it's still billions of dollars a year, but it's kind of small. You have to go into the sedan market to really play, and to have the volumes that you need to push the price down. So we knew the next car was going to be a sedan if we could figure out how to afford it when you're building it, which Tesla did, which is great. Self-driving didn't exist when we started Tesla. Nobody could do that, and that really came out in 2008, 2009. The self-driving thing was never in our plan because it just wasn't a thing. Like we just didn't have the compute power to even imagine it.
If you were in Elon's position right now, espousing these political beliefs that a lot of people find to be pernicious, assuming that what Elon says is motivated by his desire to speak truth and not his desire for power, do you think that you would use your influence to speak up about what you feel, regardless of the impact that it had on your company, or do you think you have a fiduciary duty to maintain your shareholders' best interests?
Most CEOs don't go on a political limb, and they certainly don't endorse, various, radical political views. And I think it is because they have a fiduciary responsibility, both to the shareholders but also to their employees, to not threaten the existence of the company. And I think Elon's, whatever his political views are, which I think are malleable. I think they change over time. But also, it has clearly not been to the benefit of the shareholders, at least as far as I can tell. And that, I think, is questionable. I would never do that. CEOs have always supported various political candidates, but it's quiet. They typically don't make any noise about it because they don't want their political leanings to impact their companies, really. I think is why that's the case. And I think that that's a responsible thing to do.
What's a change you think the world needs, and what are you doing about it?
I mean, on the political side, I think we're in a really weird, place, and so I do hope that there's change there. The thing that made the U.S. extraordinary for all this time has been that we had great science institutions. We spent a lot of money on basic science, and we really need to keep that up, not cut it, not zero it out like the current administration's trying. That's silliness. It is self-destructive for our future. It's also that we were open to getting the best and brightest to come here, and anything that messes that up messes up the formula that's made American exceptionalism, exceptional for all this time, right? So I'm a big believer in sort of the free flow of ideas and talented people. I'm not into open borders or anything, but we should attract the best and brightest always, and there should be it should be easy and clear how to do it. And then I've always been a free trader, basically, because being a citizen of the world, if you will, being able to work and play in different countries, I think is a huge power, and it's incredibly useful. And when we try to close ourselves off, that's sort of a disaster, I think, long term. So those are all things politically that I'd like to see go back to an earlier, sort of Reagan era, if you will. So those things are politically would have to get fixed, I think. On the, what am I doing? Studying, the past. I just became a board member of the Archaeological Institute of America, weirdly, it's an archaeology. But also, reforming education. I'm like big into that. And making government actually be able to do things again is also super important. Along with, we have to reduce the carbon footprint of everybody, and whether that's through investments that I make personally or through Sparrow, but we have to get our carbon footprint down so we can slow the climate change. Because climate change, the train has left, right?
Yeah.
We are deep into that, right? But we want to not accelerate it. We want to buy ourselves a little bit more time.
Yeah. What's so interesting is that when you guys started Tesla in 2003, there wasn't as much information about the danger of climate change as we have now.
Correct.
So was your conception of Tesla motivated by climate change, or was it?
So it's a really good question. So in 2003 when we started, Martin had become convinced climate change was real. I was a little skeptical still, although I was flipping over because we were getting new data that was suggesting it was, we could really measure it and it was really happening. In fact, it was like an IEEE article I read about getting signal from noise, and like one of the world's experts in that. And he said, I don't know what's causing it, I have no idea. But if you look at all the temperature data for the last few hundred years, it's just noise until the 1950s. And starting in the 1950s, there's a signal there. Because I don't know what the signal means. Because I just am the world expert on picking out, world expert, I'm the expert at picking out signal from noise. He was big into the cellular. He was one of the architects of the cellular networks. But there's clearly a signal there and it's getting stronger. And I don't know why, but something's happening. And that to me was like, I read that, I was like, okay, it's for real. But I'd also been in the Middle East for years. And at that time, we were importing like 10 million barrels a day of oil. And that, being in Saudi Arabia for years, working there, the oil industry and its impact on politics and stuff in the Middle East and wealth, just the enormous amount of wealth that was pouring in, that just did not feel right. I mean, it felt like we don't really want to be so dependent on people, on countries that, are just not aligned with our interests. I mean, it's just dangerous. So I really wanted to, in fact, some of our early customers were really motivated from this perspective of really wanting to not be as dependent on foreign oil in that case. So, but climate change was, at the beginning we were thinking about it, but also the great thing about oil is it's so many problems wrapped into a single commodity that if you can reduce your dependency on it, it's all good. Like every dimension of it, whether it's environmental or national security or economic, it's all good.
Is it true that you used like 700 laptop batteries to power the first model of the Roadster?
No, it's more like 7,000.
Oh, 7,000, okay.
Yeah, 6833 or something like that. Yeah, so at that time, lithium-ion batteries, there was only one standard form factor. It was called 18650s, which are like fat double A's. It's actually measurements of in millimeters of the sizes. And they were in everything. They were in all the laptops, and they were in camcorders, things before cell phones. And so they made them like by the billions per year. So they were the best batteries that money could buy. They had the highest energy density. They had the lowest price because they had these giant factories that were cranking them out. If you were to try to say, and this is where the automotive industry, when they even thought about it, they were like, well, it's going to be billions of dollars to make a new battery and they'll suck anyway, and we can't do that. We don't know anything about batteries. But there were these 18650s. And so Martin had the idea is that we'll just combine thousands of them to make the Roadster go. And at first, as sort of the more practical person, I was like, well, the manufacturing complexity and that's going to just suck. I mean, we're not going to be able to do it. But as we researched it more, we realized, the manufacturing wasn't that hard, and the benefit of using these commodity cells was so great because when you have the single most important piece of single most expensive component in your car that just dominates the BOM cost of the car, and you have that as a commodity that gets cheaper and better every year without you having to spend a dime on it. It just gets cheaper and better because there's so much competitive pressure to make them cheaper and better for all these other applications. And every car that you ship is buying so many of these cells that even as a low volume manufacturer, you could be actually a relatively big purchaser of these cells, which allows you to have those high volume numbers that the big guys, when they're buying windshields or whatever, get. We could get that on batteries because every car we sold would have so many. So the number, each car we sold was about 1,200 laptops. But laptops had multiple cells in it, which made us actually a relatively big buyer of those, which really helped our cost structure. And then ultimately, much later, Tesla took control of that supply chain and they built their own 18650s, and now they build the fatter, taller ones that are more appropriate for a car.
What's really interesting about Tesla in the early stages is that you guys had to pretty much invent everything for it, like electric air conditioning, electric steering. None of these things were off the shelf at the time. And
Total pain.
right. How do you measure competence? How do you identify the task ahead of you and say, I'm the man for the job? Do you have like a certain criteria that gave you the assurance?
Those were things that we didn't consider. And so it wasn't like, oh, we're the man for the job. We're like, you know, like, what? We can't buy that? Oh, no. Okay, God, we're going to have to, you know, spin up a couple people to go work on that because, you know, none of these things are that complicated. It's just yet another thing to go do, and you're trying to get this very complicated project, you know, out the door, and you keep running into these things that you expected to be off the shelf, and they just weren't.
Do you remember the question I asked when you came to my class in Berkeley and you were speaking? I spoke to a mentor recently, and he told me that, oh, hi, my name's Nat. Sorry, I know you, so I automatically assume you know me too. I forgot. It's not my car you see all the time on the street. I spoke to a mentor of mine recently who told me that in order to get through the very difficult task of developing whatever product you want to develop, you have to focus on the end goal and kind of emphasize that vision of what it'll look like when it's developed and see kind of what you want the future to look like with your product implemented into society. And what came to my mind was that if you emphasize that end goal, you might lose sight of the journey, which can actually contain a lot of the best moments. I feel like oftentimes when we try to picture what the outcome could be, we neglect how good the process can be. So I want to ask which one you guys think is more important to focus on while you're developing the product.
I'd say it's a blend of the two. I mean, those are both astute observations. Yeah, but I mean, one of the first of all, one of the roles of a entrepreneur, founder of a company is to remember what the vision is when things are tough. And in both of the companies we've done together, we've gone through some very dark periods. And your job and mine was to keep the team motivated, keep them wanting to do it.
You create the future by the things you do. And so if you don't actually create anything, you know, you're just going to kind of be living in the future. So as an entrepreneur, you're creating a future you want to live in by generating that new product.
Hopefully the people working on the individual things are also on their own journey and trying to get better at what they're doing, and hopefully the work is interesting and they're learning and they're happy with that.
Yeah.
But the goal for, you know, the company has to be delight that customer at the end.
When you look back on those pain in the ass moments that you had at Tesla, do you look back on them fondly, or do you look back at them as a nightmare that you're happy to be past?
I am happy that I am not dealing with the day-to-day, you know, firestorm of, you know, various disasters that I mean, when you know, any engineering project, typically when you look back, or when you are creating the narrative, it's this, like, you know, then we did this and then we did that, and it's all these successes. The reality is that, you know, this doesn't work, or, you know, this vendor flakes and you have to come up with something, and it's this total, like, firefight all the time until you finally get the thing out. And then it seems like it was preordained, but.
So I'm still unclear. You look back with fondness, but you're glad that it's done?
I'm so glad that it's not.
So the answer is both.
Yes, I'm so glad that I am not
do you even look back on them fondly, or are you just like, fuck that?
No. Those were great times.
Good.
You know, it was super fun. It was a tremendous amount of work. It was exciting and interesting and depressing sometimes, and, you know, scary and great, and it was all good. But, you know, I'm just so glad that I am not, you know, waking up in the morning again and going, oh no, what are we going to do about this? You know, that we just, you know, happened at 2 in the morning in, you know, China or whatever, and now what are we going to do about that? You know.
Yeah. What do you wake up to now? What's your life like on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I get up in the morning and, you know, I go through email, like, you know, and we look at a bunch of companies at Sparrow, so there's typically a couple of companies, you know, during the week especially, there's always 3 or 4 companies we see, which are interesting typically. Those are fun. Sometimes they're physical, you know, we drive to the site, or I, you know, show up. Generally it's just by Zoom, but, and we then get, you know, a couple of internal meetings of, you know, like, what are we going to do about this company or whatever. And then I'm also meeting with the CEOs of portfolio companies and also random, students that come to me, and all kinds of other people that I've met over the years, which is always fun to find out what's going on.
Yeah.
I like to be kind of plugged into stuff that's going on.
Mm-hmm. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you seem like a very purpose-driven person, and I'm curious what's driving you now. Do you have a goal? Do you have an ambition?
Not really. That's a really good question. I like to have some purpose. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I just joined this board of the Archaeological Institute, is because I think the work they're doing is really interesting, and I want to learn more about that. And I like to have leverage on when I was a school board official. It was interesting because we could make a decision. I could volunteer for a class, to help out in a kindergarten class or something. But if we decided, or if the teacher and I, whatever we did, would only really affect that class, and it was great to be on the school board, because then it would affect the whole school. In this case, our district only had one school, but it would affect the whole school. Mm-hmm. And I like to have that kind of leverage on things that we do.
Yeah. If we stripped you of all your success right now, what would you be most proud of? If we took away Tesla, if we took away Nuvo Media, if we took away your fortune, what are you most proud of in life?
Oh, I mean, I think the kids came out really well. I mean, that's every parent hopefully is going to say that.
That's the thing that I'm most ambitious about, is starting a family. That's what really excites me. And so whenever I meet somebody who has all of this professional success, I kind of like to see how they balance family and like where they derive their happiness from. And
oh no, the family thing is great. One thing that was an inspiration, so in between Nuvo Media and Tesla, I worked for a friend of mine she was the CTO of Cisco, and then she stepped down from Cisco in 2001, I think so, in 2001, and started a company which, the company ended up not doing super well because it was at a bad time, I think, for the industry. But she's terrific. And so I worked for her for a few years in between. And one of the things that she was really into, which I super appreciated, was she'd work super hard. She'd get to work and just crank through everything. But at 5 p.m. or whatever she would be, it didn't matter what was going on, unless it was like something really catastrophic. But I mean, she would be like, oh, gotta go pick up my kid. And she would go home, and as did her husband, and they would just be in family time, and then she would show back up on email, like at 11 or something, just to make sure nothing had happened. But I really appreciated that she put limits on what work was going to do.
yeah.
And so that I thought was a very good role model, to have both kids and work being insane.
Now that you are where you are in life and you look back, what is important?
Oh,
just
it's
in
the
general?
people. Yeah,
It's people.
It's always the people. And whether that's, you can argue, whether that's family or if it's connections, because connections are not, both. I mean, social connections are really important. We know that from the impact of social media has decreased in-person social connections, and it's causing all this grief. The way that connections work, in my opinion, is not only is it, I think, just fundamentally interesting what other people are doing, but it also increases the probability of luck, of serendipity helping you out. So if you can imagine, like, you never leave your house and you just never interact with people, the chances of you like randomly running into somebody that's doing something interesting that you end up, helping out and being part of is zero, right?
Yeah.
So if you are out in the world, meeting people, doing things, it's just, you have so much a higher chance of coming upon interesting things that you'll end up doing.
Yeah.
So and then people say, oh, you got so lucky. Yeah, I mean, it was luck. That exact moment was luck. But I have lots of those moments. So my chances of having luck are so much higher than someone that doesn't do that.
Yeah.
So it's always about the people.
A lot of my serendipitous encounter just comes from showing up every day.
Yeah, exactly.
I really try to put myself out there. I believe in something bigger than me conspiring to help, and that might just be my confirmation bias playing tricks on me. But it seems like so often when I go outside, I run into somebody that can help me in some way, whether it's somebody to come on my show. I was in LA for the last month. I think I ran into a celebrity maybe 3 times a week and got their information.
That is LA.
I mean, it is LA, yes, but I have friends that have lived there their whole lives and don't have that same luck. So for me, it seems like there's a law of attraction. Do you believe in anything like that, or?
Yeah, the universe does tend to help people, I think, in some weird way.
Really?
I don't think that it is. I think that it is probably an illusion based on confirmation bias, but it does, and being open. So the more open you are to running into people and looking and seeing what's going on, you just have so much higher chance of this. And then people are connected in all kinds of crazy ways. So, like when my daughter decided to got this research project in Indonesia, we discovered, we mentioned it, we discovered all kinds of people we knew, like had relatives that lived in Indonesia or like were there now, or, and that, of course, then extends that network to her if she needs it, whatever. But we have to be open to those kinds of serendipitous things. And so when your friends live in LA and they don't ever see these celebrities, part of it is that you notice them and you're not intimidated by them, and you're willing to go up in a way that doesn't creep them out and cause them to hide, which is good. And you clearly have decided to put yourself in places where such things might happen. This is something that engineering kind of gets you over in some weird sense, because when you're looking at a project and you kind of, engineers, take the project and they put it in little pieces, there's always going to be at least one piece that's super hard. Mm-hmm. Like you look at this and it's like, well, if it's all easy, then, it's not a problem. And it's probably not worth doing. But you look at it and it's like, oh, that is going to be really hard.
Right.
That's where you start. Mm-hmm. You never start on the easy stuff. Mm-hmm. You always start on the thing that is the most hard, because if you get all the easy stuff and you can't do the hard thing, well, then the project fails. But if you do the hard thing, then the easy stuff you can clean up and it all works, right? So you get this mindset of you always go after the kind of difficult thing first. And I think that makes that philosophy or that strategy actually works relatively well in most things, Mm-hmm. Sometimes you need to learn a lot more to really understand how hard a piece is, but once you kind of know that, oh, that's the hard thing, well, we'd better go solve that first, even though it's the most uncomfortable, if you will.
You think if you weren't a shareholder in Tesla right now, would you still care about the trajectory of the company, or would you?
Oh, yeah. I really believe we need to electrify transportation as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. And given, at the moment we have obviously complex political situations going on, but ultimately the electric cars win, and we want to get there as quickly as we can. It's already reduced global oil consumption by, I think the International Energy Agency said, about 1.2 million barrels a day. Not just Tesla, but the sort of electrification.
I mean, but the electrification is because of Tesla. All of the new electric vehicles were inspired by what you created.
Yeah, I mean, they would have eventually happened, but I think we certainly moved it forward a decade or so, and that's that's a good thing. So I really do care about I care about Tesla, but I also I want Ford to be successful. They had this great, the F-150 Lightning, conceptually was so great, and then they kind of blew it on the engineering, and it was not successful, price-wise, and some of their engineering challenges, which was just too bad, because that could have been really, really awesome. Mm-hmm.
One piece of advice that you have to give to me right now. You're looking at a young man filled with ambition, needs a little bit direction, who admires you very much. What's your one piece of advice to me?
Well, I've never had a direction, right? I've only just done things that were interesting. Yeah. So I would just do things that interest you. Obviously you want to do things that interest you that hopefully also, get remunerated in some way that you can survive. But there's so many interesting things going on right now. To settle for a job that isn't interesting, I just think is a waste of time. Now, there are times in any job that are just work. That's why we have that word work, you know, like it's not always fun. But you should always be doing something where the goal is at least interesting.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I have to say, from the day we met, I knew how much I wanted to get you on the show because of how humble you were and how soft-spoken and kind you were. Despite all of your enormous success, you remain...
The enormous success, I mean, we got lucky a couple times.
A lot of people get lucky and still do not maintain your dignity and your humility. So I appreciate that you haven't lost yourself through all that. And I appreciate that you're so generous with your time to give a kid like me who really doesn't have anything to offer you, just wisdom. So thank you for letting me come here and fumble around with my tripods and drink your coffee and pick your brain. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, it's been great fun. Oh, I messed up my back last week.